So this is pretty exciting. I don't usually buy American comics. I don't usually buy crowdfunded comics. I usually just buy English comics, particularly things like Judge Dredd. But every so often there's a big splash in the industry or something along those lines that gets your attention. Well, ISOM made Eric July, the creator, a lot of money. It was put out as his response to the fact that he felt that Marvel and DC had lost their way, wanted to get back to sort of a more good guys versus evil guys sort of stories, just, a bit more action orientated. Now, because I don't know that much about American comics, some of these names don't mean a lot to me. Cliff Richards in the UK, that's a singer. Gaeb, Eltaeb, I do know who that is because, again, sometimes the splashes that somebody make in the industry do reach across to the British side of the water, and I know that he is the guy that quit on DC because he felt that they were too politically correct or something along those lines, and he's a colourist. So I do know a little bit about the background of this, but basically my interest was that it made an absolute ton of cash, and I did a review of Berserker that was in part created by Keanu Reeves for the exact same reason. It just made a lot of noise, so it seemed worth checking out. However, ISOM was just too expensive. It was too expensive for the book and too expensive for the postage and packaging. It would have cost me something like $80 to get it. And so basically I've bought this one second-hand, pre-read, so it's got a few little dinks and things like that. Down here, this one on the back, there's quite a pronounced one, but I didn't mind because I just wanted to read it and see what all the fuss was about. Now, part of the fuss I know is about Eric July himself having a big following on YouTube, being an outspoken critic and stuff like that, so that I know that that's part of it, but is the book any good? So I've seen a few reviews, basically, and things on Twitter that seem to focus on the negatives. I wanted to make up my own mind. This cover is not bad, but it's not brilliant. I saw that Mike Partiga, who's very outspoken about not liking this, took umbrage with this leg. I kind of think if it's gone across on a plane sort of that way, see what I'm like, towards this, his thigh would be going that way towards the background, and that actually might be all right. But there are definite issues with some of the artwork in this book, which we'll get to. Nothing not to like about that, because you have the two sides of the guy. Avery is the main guy, like the family man and the superhero man. And as we're going to get into it, we're going to see that Avery's left his superhero past behind. You would think from this to be more of a family-orientated person, but that's not the case. He's just kind of left it a little bit like Luke in The Last Jedi, in that he's just left and isn't doing anything more. So we see Avery, he's on this compound out in the middle of nowhere, not sure what he's doing there other than not being a superhero. And his sister gives him a ring and says, we need your help. Some girl that we both know has gone missing. So initially I've got to say, this was rubbing me up the wrong way. The keeping of Avery's face from the camera, or sort of shielding it, makes this pose particularly awkward. And the idea that we're keeping his identity a secret when this guy would clearly know who he is, this panel basically was the problem I had. But it's a minor thing. I'm not that bothered. And then we do get the face reveal. And like this, somewhere you would not want to be, there's like a big brawl going on. Yaira, whatever that is, I don't really know. Don't know what she's doing other than she's fighting Alpha Core. I don't know really who they are, other than they're on the cover. So we're kind of like, are they the good guys? Because if Avery's the good guy, they're fighting him. So it's not clear who's the good guys, but this sort of reads like Alpha Core are. Meanwhile, Avery gets involved. He goes to see somebody that he used to know, like an old school friend, who is now a big shot in business, and who tries to get him roughed up. I love this guy, like massive dude. And it's a great use of the page turn there, like to see that big dude getting a pummeling. But there is something really horrible on this page, which is Avery's hand is way too small. Way too small. What's going on there when you look at that one, which is actually, that's back. That's forward. So part of the problem with the art, where there is an issue, is that Cliff Richards absolutely loves that. Like this one, you see, I'm looking down from above on the action, which means you've got to be really careful with your proportions of your people. This is actually pretty decent frame, to be honest. But again, you're seeing slightly above, looking down. You've got to really work your frame, work your proportions really hard. The foreshortening here again makes his hand look like it's really tiny. But there's some good stuff. And then we find out that there's an except, which I assumed meant exceptionals. Again, up in the ceiling or up in the lights, looking down. This wrestling move, I know that fans of WWE absolutely love this, and it's like a big deal, but it is absolutely moronic. This guy is sort of leaping onto his back to smash Avery against the floor, but it's like he's also on top of you. The chance of you hurting yourself are much higher than you hurting Avery, but there's nothing wrong with the panel. So the action here, we don't really know a lot about who anyone is, but it's all pretty good. I by this point, I'm really starting to warm to it. And this bit has attracted some comments on the internet, like Yaira's thrown through the air miles away by the Alpha Core, and Avery's thrown through the air like miles away by this guy. Get up out of here. Go on, why not? And they bump into each other, and I don't know, I just found it funny. I didn't have a problem with that at all. It's like something people online are saying how stupid and daft it is. Like, yeah, but it's a comic book. There's always something that's like crazy or zany. If it wasn't, then we wouldn't need it to be a comic book, would we? So I really didn't mind it. It just made me laugh. Yaira, who, again, we now know that she's the bad guy because she takes Avery right up into the air and then like throws him. So she's definitely trying to kill him. So that's not superhero behaviour. Great panel. But again, that looking down, you've got to be really careful with your proportions. I'm not entirely sure that these two look right, but generally a really good panel. Avery gets out of prison. All this stuff, like the city is good, the art is good. The issue with it is now not so much the artwork, it is the story itself, or particularly Avery's motivation in it, because he's looking out for this young guy who's a friend of somebody that he genuinely cares about. But now he's saying, even though he hasn't found her, saving Jasmine wasn't my primary focus. I almost forgot about it. That clown talked down to me, and that won't go unaddressed. So he's actually just more upset about the treatment he got from like his old schoolmate, the gangster guy, than he is about actually trying to find this girl. Without any semblance of a plan, Avery just goes back to do what he just did and have a fight again. Cliff Richards, again, this panel's pretty bad. With the looking down, the proportions, that ain't right. That ain't right. I'm not sure what's going on here either. And then we come around to this of Avery. What on earth is he doing there? That's not right. But that's not to do with the looking down, because that's a much more sort of 2D straight on panel. But this one's good. This one's good. We're getting a better sense of who he is and what he's like. But yeah, when you decide I'm going to do this, quite often looking down on people, your proportions have to be perfect. And whoa, that's not. Nor is that. Also, his body's going that way, but by contrast, Avery seems to be leaning like sort of right back. It just ain't right. Yeah, this is something that Mike, I saw in Mike's review that he didn't like, and I've got to agree with him here. This looks like this is a setup to something great, a really, really powerful panel, and then I'm not sure what's going on here. Did they bounce off each other? Because then you'd expect like an impact panel, and then to see them bouncing off, or did they just miss and then turn round? It's not clear. And again, if you were like bouncing off, you'd have like a boom, wouldn't you? Like a boom, and then them sort of flying back off each other. But yeah, good action, and it's like for 100 pages of story, there's plenty of fighting, there's plenty of brawling. If I liked Avery more, if his motivation was slightly better, I feel like this would be the more powerful for it. But there's no cleverness. When you're outmatched physically, what he does is he puts himself on the wall and then uses the wall to spring into him, and they go through another wall, and then the guy's unconscious. Yeah, I don't like it. To come up with something a bit smarter to turn that victory, I think would have been much more interesting. He turns up at his family's house, where there's like the little niece. But yeah, you get a better side to Avery now. It would have been nice to have had this earlier to see like a little bit more of his human side, make us care for him a little bit more. But there's no end to it. When I used to read American comics a bit more regularly, it was things like Image and Top Cow. And you would have in a book like this size, like this would be a collection obviously of a number of floppies, you would have a story, part of an overriding arc, but you would also have a self-contained story like this guy's done a bad thing, we need to bust him, and then at the end you find that it ties in with like an overarching plot, a plot that will span like many years. This doesn't. It just ends like, oh look, I've got my uniform back and now I'm going back for more. It makes this just too much. Too much to get nowhere, to still have no resolution of any part of it. That he retired, it isn't clear why. It would have been better to have had him retired after we see him being a hero, and then sort of, like if this was volume 3 is what I'm saying. If we see him doing some heroics and then see him have a reason to retire, all of this would make more sense. Him being back in uniform would be a much bigger deal than having seen none of that, not knowing any of that, and then just going, oh, right, so he's back in uniform and I'm supposed to be like blown away by this as our ending. Because even though it says we're not done yet, well, we know we're not because the story's not over, but we are in this book, because I don't think that this is part of it. It suddenly cuts to like a rock band who apparently are some sort of superhero type things and they fight demons. But I've got to say that all of that, this Northricker thing, that looks bloody terrible. I have to say that looks really, really bad. So I'm hoping that that's not part of the ISOM world, but it's really not clear whether it is or not, whether this is part of a B story or part of a separate story or just an advert for another book. I really don't know. But it's terrible. And then you've got ISOM 2, sort of next on ISOM 2, but you get nothing. Like a guy with a gun and somebody with a moustache looking up Avery. Nothing. Yaira will return. I don't know why I would care about that. And then it says soon enough, which, okay, it's like, I don't mind that, but I've got to say that this picture of Yaira, that is really, really awful. Really awful. Just that guy, that looks like the guy from Tango and Cash, you know, where they go, you broke that jaw. That's who that looks like. It's not in any way feminine. And to be fair to Cliff Richards, you know, of all the criticisms I picked out of that, this is a 100-page book. I would say that 8-9 times out of 10, he's got it right and done a really good job. It's just perhaps that ratio needs to be closer to 95-99% and not just like 9 out of 10, which would only be 90. Overall, I liked this. It was action-packed enough, and Avery was just interesting enough as a character that I read this pretty quickly and enjoyed it, and I didn't want to stop until it was over. And then I was like, oh, that's a bit disappointing that I didn't get more. Like the story, because there's no self-contained thing in here, I wouldn't say it's any better than a 6, but perhaps ISOM number 2 would be all that I would want to finish this sort of arc with the gangster guy that runs the club, and then we'll see like it's part of a wider arc. I wouldn't want to read any more of that because then it would be starting to drag a little bit. But I expected this to be terrible because it was announced and then it was out. And when you see other sort of crowdfunding, I know Eric J didn't quite crowdfund in the traditional things, but you see the other crowdfunding stuff takes, 2-3 years sometimes to come out. To see this be announced and then out so quick, and then to see ISOM 2 announced so quickly after that, and it has already been fulfilled for the most part before I've even got this one on the sort of secondary market, I genuinely thought that this is going to be like really rushed, it's going to be really bad, the story's going to be terrible, and from Mike's reviews, I genuinely thought that it would just be every page was kind of trash, and it's not like that at all. I'm less exacting, I think, than Mike about comic books because I don't read them so much. Is this a return to the glory days of Marvel and DC? Absolutely not. It wouldn't take a lot, slight polishing of art, slight polishing of story, for this to be in the same ballpark as the indies of the 90s. So I certainly think that, and what I see, which is not a lot, of current DC and Marvel, I think that this probably is on a par, if not better than some of that. And it wouldn't be much of a video if I didn't plug my own books, which they're not comic books, they are actual books. This is the first one. It contains 2 novellas First one is called Professor Lovecraft versus the Zargs, and the other one is Professor Lovecraft and the Fart-Powered Prophecy Machine. So you can appreciate that kind of zany and silly. But the reason I mention them is that even though that looks like a bit of a doorstep, like I say, it is 2 stories. Typically, the individual stories have come about that thick. This is the latest one, The Princess of Pluto. They don't ask any more of your time than reading a comic book. The ISOM book here will take you about the same amount of time, even though this is text. So if you're interested in those, then by all means, you can get them on Amazon. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.
Sexington University is just your everyday, typical university. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens here. There's no alien attacks, no homicidal houseplants, no meteor showers, no Cthulhu cults, no fatal field trips, and absolutely no alien professors. Enroll today and get this fabulous free pen.